This is one of my favourite images of the Apennines in Italy, taken from a high point above Arcevia. It's a nod to Leonardo da Vinci and his fascination with aerial perspective. That is, a tendency of objects to decrease in contrast and colour saturation and take on a bluish tinge as distance increases. In the past 20 years, my wife and I have been travelling to Italy, and we've always included a stay in the Marche region. On our first day, our hosts recommended local places to visit, and Arcevia was one of them. I loved it straight away. It's one of the highest villages in the Marche, with spectacular views in every direction. Above the village there's a fabulous public park with wide open views. So I've been there many times over the years. One of the advantages of getting to know a place well is that you can go back to a location in different seasons, different light, and at different times of the day. I can use location metadata I've saved with my images in Lightroom to quickly locate all the photographs I've taken over the years in Arcevia. If you want to know more about how to do this, have a look at my video on using metadata by following the link in the description. This composition is unique because it was taken as a telephoto panorama with a 300mm lens, well, a zoom lens set to 300mm. I can illustrate this by showing you an image I took from a similar location with a drone earlier this year with a very wide angle lens, and it just illustrates how far away I was from that scene to be able to get that particular composition. I thought it would be interesting to reprocess this panorama and see if I can improve on it, because it's been nearly 20 years since I took the images. And post-processing software has improved a lot in that time. So here are the original captures, 12 frames with about 1/3 overlap. If we have a look at the camera metadata, I can see that they were taken on a Canon 1DS, which is one of the early full-frame digital cameras. These images were processed with an early version of Adobe Camera Raw, and I can confirm that by looking at the Basic tab and seeing that I have a more limited range of tonal adjustments. I can update the process version by going down to the very bottom of the right-hand panel group to the calibration tab and changing it from version 1 to version 6, the current version. If you watch the image preview, you can see it change. Adobe's Camera Raw processing engine has become more sophisticated over time, and the process version reflects the changes and additions of things such as masking. The reason they left the old process versions available is that in case you want to stick to the original raw conversion algorithm for particular images for consistency's sake. If I go back up to the global color adjustments, I now have a bigger range of sliders to choose from. I can see that exposure and contrast have been changed in the conversion process, so I'm going to take those back to 0 by double-clicking the exposure text and the contrast text to the left of the sliders. I can copy those adjustments over to the other raw captures by selecting all and making sure the border of the image I want to copy settings from is the most selected. To do this, you click on the actual image, not the border. If you click on the border, it will deselect all of the other images. Next, click on the Sync Settings button at the bottom right of the right-hand panel group, click Check All, then click Synchronize. If I hit the N key, I can view these images in preview mode. You can see they're very light and of low contrast due to the atmospheric haze the long lens has compressed. Looking at the histogram for one of them, I can see that the exposure is pretty good, and I know I will be able to manipulate the tonal range for a more compelling image. I'll right-click on one of these images and go down to Photomerge Panorama. I will leave the projection on cylindrical, as that is correct for a single row panorama. You'll notice a slight slope to the image. This is due to a flaw in an early homemade panorama device that didn't quite rotate the camera on a level base. I'll click on Fill Edges to do a content-aware fill on the blank edges and click on the Merge button. So here is the stitched panorama back in Lightroom's Develop module. First to global adjustments. I like to start with the biggest problems first, and here it's obviously contrast. By manipulating the exposure, contrast and black sliders, I can stretch out the histogram to cover most of the available brightness range. My aim is to get the image looking clearer and more appealing without clipping any highlight or shadow detail. I can click on the triangles in the histogram or use the J key to switch on the clipping warning display. I should mention the Dehaze slider at this stage because atmospheric haze is what it was intended for. But I'm not a big fan of Dehaze in global adjustments as I find it too aggressive and heavy-handed. I prefer doing my own mix of exposure, contrast, black and shadow sliders to control haze at a global level. Once I have the overall contrast looking better, I can check the temperature and tint sliders to make sure that the white balance is looking pretty neutral. Okay, so on to local or mask adjustments. I'm going to mask the sky using Lightroom's Auto Sky Mask and just to add a subtle hint of blue at this stage. Next, I would like to look at enhancing the light from the sun, which is coming from the left. To do this, I'll add a radial gradient and manipulate the handles for maximum feathering and center the mask roughly where the sun would be. I also want to adjust the zoom level to get a clearer idea of what's going on. And to do this, I go to the Navigator panel at the top of the left-hand panel set and change the zoom level to 25%. With this mask, I want to add a hint of warm color temperature and use the exposure and highlight sliders to brighten the area. And lastly, I'll add a hint of warmth with the color temperature slider. To check the effect, I like to move the mask around by grabbing the center dot and also turning the mask on and off by using the eyeball icon. Next, I would like to draw the eye to the church by increasing the contrast in just that area. I add another radial gradient centered on the church area. The clarity slider in the effect drop down is a good place to start. I'm going to ramp it all the way up to 100% to get a clear idea of the effect I have to start with. I really want to isolate the effect to just the ridge and not the mist behind. So by subtracting a luminosity mask, I should be able to achieve this. So I make sure the main mask is selected, go to the subtract button and down to luminance range. To get started, I simply click on the mist and it does a pretty good job. But I can refine this luminance selection by using the adjustments panel in the masks tab. It can be quite handy to click on the show luminance map checkbox. I can see the luminance mask has included some of the background mountain. So I click on the subtract button and use a brush mask to tweak the mask so that that mountain is excluded. It helps to click on the show overlay checkbox to see the mask while you're working. As a final check, I go back to the parent mask and see if the slider adjustments are at their optimum settings. At this stage, I like to go back to the global adjustments and see if the overall exposure, contrast and color are about right. And now to hit the Y key for a before and after view to see if my processing has made any difference. The original looks quite yellow, but that was possibly because it was before a white balancing. But I can see that the contrast and the definition have improved a lot. And now to compare my 2024 processing with my much earlier efforts. I can see straight away that I've kept a lot more surrounds in my latest image. And I probably don't need all that dark hillside on the right, so I'm going to hit the R key to take me into the cropping tool, and I'm going to crop the right hand side. I can use the guides to neatly line up the church on the line of thirds. So there you have it. After 20 years, with all the improvements and developments of technology, I think I can only improve marginally on my original interpretation of this image. And it is an interpretation because the photographer decides on many things in the processing stage. Things that can completely change the look, such as exposure, white balance, depth of field, local adjustments. So my takeaway tips from this video are: Number 1, knowing a place well. And by the way, this can include your own backyard. If you're able to travel, there is an advantage to staying in one location for a period of time. At first you just want to look around and it's kind of a discovery mode. But when you find a promising location, then you can go back when conditions are optimal to get a more compelling image. Tip number 2, when to stop. It's quite a skill knowing when to stop working on an image, because it's possible that by continuing you're not going to improve it, and in fact you may make it worse. It's good to step back from an image and give it some time so you can be more objective in your judgment of it. A trick I like to use is to actually print out an image and put it on the wall or put it on the fridge so that whenever you walk by it you can have a fresh appraisal of it. Tip number 3, how do others see your images? It's hard to be objective about your own work. When we see our own images, we remember how difficult they were to get or how cold and uncomfortable we felt at the time. But the viewer doesn't know those things, so the impactful images need to stand on their own merits. And that's all for this week. Thanks for watching.